This time it's sporting 650s of the 1950s. In the 1930s and 40s, a 500cc machine was a big sporting bike. But by the 1950s, it wasn't seen as quite enough, especially in the American market, where cubes really matter. So the companies had enlarged their cylinders out to 650cc's. Now, while this may have meant that increased vibration across the parallel twin range, but it also meant quite a bit more power too. And so here are 5 classic sporting British 650s of the 1950s. The Triumph Tiger 110. The Triumph Tiger 110 would sit on top of Triumph's sporting range from its introduction in 1953 and the arrival of the Bonneville in 1959, and was at the time Triumph's fastest production bike. The engine was of course based on the 649cc unit used by the Thunderbird touring model, although it now sported an aluminium head with more aggressive valve timing and compressor raised to 8.5 to 1. The engine was of 649cc's with a bore and stroke of 71 by 82, and the engine would push 40 horsepower at 6,500 rpm through its 4-speed gearbox. On the road, the machine featured Triumph's single downtube swinging arm suspension frame, which, although light at just 177 kilos or 390 pounds, was not the most rigid, so handling at speed could be, well, interesting. But the seat height was low at 775mm or 30.5 inches, and the bike was very comfortable, and the styling was rather functional. It was a pretty bike, but didn't have the aggressive look of later machines. Edward Turner was not really into racing, so viewed the bike as a fast touring machine. The Triumph's American importers saw the machine rather differently, and pressed Triumph continuously for a more aggressively styled and indeed faster machine. Even though the bike boasted a 109mph top speed, which was really moving for the mid-50s. But ultimately Triumph would relent and add twin carburettor heads, creating the iconic Bonneville, the 110 being deleted from the range in 1961. The Matchless G12. Matchless was somewhat late to the 650 game because their G9 500cc unit was difficult to enlarge. They would do so through increments, developing the G11 600 and then on to the G12, which wouldn't arrive until 1959, or 58 in some markets. The MC engine was famed for its unique design features. It was the only British twin to feature a central bearing and use separate head and barrels. But there were lots of other clever design features also, including a cam mechanism for adjusting the valves, a system which BSA would later copy for their sporting singles. In 1959, designer Phil Walker would redesign the machine to feature a nodular iron crankshaft to give it more strength, and an attempt to dampen down some of the vibes. The G12 would become increasingly sporty for the CS and then the CSR. The CS would feature an 8.5 compression ratio and was capable of just over 100 miles an hour, while the CSR, that's competition sprung roadster to me and you, although often called the coffee shop racer by the riders of the day, was even more potent. The engine was of 646cc's and ran a bore and stroke of 72 by 79.3, while the standard model made around 35 horsepower at 6,500 rpm. For the CSR, power was in the low 40s and top speed of just around 110 miles an hour. But despite the CSR's sporting pretension, Matchless was never able to shove off the moniker of an old man's bike. The Ariel Red Hunter. Like the rest of the companies, Ariel's first parallel twin had been a 500cc, the KG, and later the more sporty KH. These models would feature a 4.5 camshaft rather like the Triumph, and in the more sporty model, the KHA, would sport an all aluminium head and barrel. Now these 500s had been the work of one Valentine Page, and it was to another of his designs that Ariel would turn when they wanted to develop a larger still engine. because to produce their own 650, Ariel would turn to the BSA A10, BSA being Ariel's parent company at that time. The Ironhead version of the A10 was shipped over to the Ariel works and then installed in Ariel's own running parts, to produce a machine that was surprisingly different to ride than its A10 sister. Initially the machine was simply called the FH, although this would later be changed to Huntmaster, and the machine's 100 mph performance would see it challenge their own Square 4 for the bragging rights at the top of the Ariel range. The Huntmaster's BSA engine ran an iron head and barrel and was of 648cc with a bore and stroke of 70 by 84. Compression ratio on earlier models was 6.5, although later more sporty variants would feature 7.5 compression ratios. Dimensionally, the bike had a dry weight of 181 kilos or 400 pounds, and seat height was 787 centimeters or 31 inches. The Huntmaster was deleted from the range in 1959 with the introduction of the parallel twin two-strokes, although one variant would survive, with a more sporty Cyclone version being introduced to the US market, which claimed around 40 horsepower and around 105 miles an hour top speed. But the Cyclone can be seen as little more than a way of using up all the stock parts left at the factory, and by the end of 1960 it too was gone. The Norton Dominator 99. Like parent company AMC, Norton was somewhat late to the bigger bike market, and in fact would not have a 650 in the range till the 650SS in 1962. And the Dominator 99 would feature an engine of just 600cc, or 597cc to be exact, with a bore and stroke of 68 by 82, there was a compression ratio of 7.6 to 1, and the machine ran either single or twin carbs, and the machine was available as a single carb model or twin carbs as featured to the Dominator 99 SS. And in this form Norton would claim 44 horsepower at 6,750 RPM. But what the machine lacked in outright CCs, it more than made up for with its chassis. The bike of course featuring the mechanless featherbed frame. In the 50s of course this would be the original wide line design, although in 1960 Norton would move the top rails together to create the slimline frame, which would improve rider comfort somewhat. 1960 would see the introduction of the Deluxe. The Deluxe models would feature enclosed bodywork. This was never particularly popular, and many machines today have simply removed them to create calf races. Early models would feature Norton's own gearbox, although later machines from 1957 would feature an AMC gearbox, which was actually quite a nice design and easier to use, which problematically would continue to be used right through to the Commando models of the mid-70s. When in race conditions at least, it would gain a reputation for poor reliability, although this was not helped by the worn-out machinery on which the gearbox was being built by that period. The 600cc 99 would continue through until 1962, when it was finally replaced by a 650. The BSA A10 Road Rocket. The Road Rocket was of course a development of the earlier Golden Flash, and while the A10 had a reputation as a solid dependable mount and had a very good chassis, it was not seen as being as sporty as the Norton or the Triumph equivalents. And so in 1954 BSA would introduce the Road Rocket. This had an aluminium head and did not feature a cast-in manifold like the Golden Flash. The engine was of 646cc, around a bore and stroke of 70 by 84. Compression ratio however was up to 7.2 to 1, and there was a revised camshaft and an AML TT carburetor fitted as standard. And this would increase power to 40 horsepower at 6,000 RPM, and so to ensure reliability, BSA would beef up the bottom end a little. BSA's chassis was excellently rigid, but was a little heavier than some at 190 kilos or 418 pounds. Despite this, top speed was a claimed 109 miles an hour. The Road Rocket would remain in BSA's range until 1958, when it was replaced by the Super Rocket, essentially an updated version. Although this machine would enjoy a fairly short production run, being shoved off its pedestal at the top of BSA's 650 range in 1962 by the Rocket Gold Star, and then of course would come the unit construction A65 models. But that's another story for another video I think. What other bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us cover in a future video? Perhaps you've got a bike we can use for a test drive. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.